Welcome, everyone. Welcome to nonduality.live. Welcome, Richard. You're muted, Richard. We're going to be spending about 90 minutes. If you have any questions, you can ask you can raise your hand or you can type the question in. We're live streaming on Facebook, on YouTube, on nonduality.live, also on Nothing Media. And Richard has a meeting coming up this Saturday with Don. A live meeting, actually, not a Zoom meeting. Hi, Richard.
Hello, yeah, a real live meeting in London, if you happen to be in London or nearby, at 2:30 in Hampstead in London. And if you're interested, the details are on my website.
I'll post it here too. If you would like to do introduction, Richard, I'll mute myself now.
Okay. Yes, I just mentioned that, of course, is going to be the first live meeting for over a year and a half because of the situation. So it's quite exciting. Yeah, I'll give a brief introduction now then. Non-duality, not two. Where should we begin? And all the many places we could. Well, the normal state of being, we could say, if you like, the state of being for most people is what could be called duality. And duality means two. So what does it mean to say that the normal state of being is to live in duality? What is that two-ness? Well, it's pretty simple. We could say that it consists of, there is a sense that I am a separate being. This may sound so obvious that it sounds, almost like, well, why is somebody bothering to say that? It is so obvious that I am a separate being. I'm a separate person. That's what I feel myself to be. That's what I obviously am. So we can say, okay, well, that's one thing. What's the other thing? Because duality is two. Well, we could say the other thing is there's the sense that there is an external world through which I move. So we could say there's the sense of me, and I am separate from everything else, which is why this is often called, let's say, living in a state of separation. So the common sense, the usual sense, if you like, for most of us, most of the time, is that I'm a separate being and I move through a world full of objects and things and in which events happen, but perhaps most crucially, this world through which I move is full of other people. And I kind of have to negotiate my life in relationship with these other people. And there are various other, let's say, senses that go with this common experience. And those senses are so common and so usual that I probably never think about them. And if anybody was to ever challenge their reality, I might actually think they were perhaps a little bit mad even. And so this sense that here I am, I exist as a person, goes with certain very obvious things, such as, well, for a start, I move through something called space and something called time. More crucially, perhaps, that second thing, something called time. So I feel like I have a past, if you like. I come from a past. I am here in something called the present, and I am moving towards something called the future. And you could say that that sense of past, present, and future constitutes quite a large part of something else, which is very important, which seems to belong to me. You could say something that I own, which is my story. I, as an individual, move through time from past through the present to the future, enacting my story. And that story is probably going to feel pretty important in some ways. And another thing that I'm likely to be carrying with me, you could say, in this state of separation through this story called my life, another metaphor for it could be, if you like, to say that, there is a movie going on and I am the star of that movie. I am the star of the movie called Richard's Life. So there I am, proceeding from the past through the present to the future. And it's quite possible that something I'll be carrying with me is something called meaning. It's quite likely that living in this state of separation, life as it is, what do I mean by that? Something very simple, sitting here in a chair, the sound of a voice, movement on a screen, a glass of water, the taste of a sip of water. That's what I mean by life itself. Phenomena, if you like, just whatever's happening. It's quite likely that in this state of feeling that I'm a separate person, that's not going to be enough. That's not going to be enough to satisfy me. So I will add to that in one way or other something extremely important called meaning. I will give my life meaning. I mean, after all, what is a movie if it doesn't have, you know, some sort of meaning, some sort of conclusion which is meaningful, to which the hero is moving? So something very important I'll probably be carrying with me is meaning. Now that meaning could come from all sorts of things, all sorts of areas, but it's quite likely to come maybe from a religious belief, from a spiritual belief, from a mystical belief. It doesn't have to, but it's quite likely to. And it will give my life something very, very precious, without which I might fall into depression and despair, who knows, called a purpose. You know, I'm likely to see my life as having purpose, and I'm moving towards the fulfillment of that purpose, whatever it is, you know, ultimately pleasing God or becoming enlightened, or, you know, it could be something much more pragmatic, like, you know, having a bigger house, who knows. Now, the suggestion from here is a very simple one. The suggestion from here is that everything that I've just described is simply a fiction. Everything that I've just described is unreal, except as thoughts, as feelings, as words drifting across the airwaves, if you like, from me to you, although there is no me and you. So the suggestion from here is that everything that I talked about so far is a fiction. It's a fiction that there is a world which is separate from me. It's a fiction that there is a me which is separate from that world. It's even a fiction that there is a me at all. So the challenge from here is that the me does not exist. And certainly it's a fiction that whatever meaning I give to my life, whatever God I might worship, or, you know, whatever philosophy I feel is all encompassingly important, that these are all fictions. They are stories made up by a mind. I'm going to throw something else in here, a mind that does not actually exist. They're stories which are made up by a mind. Really, the bottom line is, in order to make the pain of feeling separate more bearable. You know, most of us live with the pain of feeling separate, and it's pretty unbearable at times. Not at all times, sometimes it's fun, but at times it can become pretty unbearable. And so to make it bearable, we give our life purpose and meaning. We could say that, you know, purpose and meaning are the painkillers that we take when the headache of being separate becomes too much for us to bear. So if I have a literal headache, I reach for a bottle of aspirin. If I have a metaphysical and metaphorical headache, then I don't know, I reach for Christianity or Buddhism or whatever. That's the suggestion from here. And further, the suggestion from here is that all of that, everything that I've been talking about so far, which seems so solid and so real, and the most solid and the most real part of that, of course, is the sense that I exist as a separate person, that can all collapse. And when it collapses, it is likely to take with it everything that I've just been talking about. It's likely to take with it meaning and purpose and time. It's likely to take from me the reality of my past. It's likely to take from me the reality of the future that I seem to be moving towards. Any story that gives my life meaning is likely to go. I've already talked about time. Something I forgot to throw in, another precious gift that the person has, is free will. I don't know how I could have forgotten to put that one in. I mean, that surely is the most precious gift of all. But if you don't believe that that is the most precious gift of all, just try going up to somebody in a bar and having a conversation, starting a conversation with them about how free will does not exist. It's a very, very fast, easy, quick way to get somebody angry. So as everything collapses, it takes away, if you like, my past, my future, the meaning I have given to my life, sense of free will, purpose. Is this sounding awful? Is this sounding like we are plunging into the absolute ultimate existential despair? Because if it is sounding like that, no. I mean, I can understand why it sounds like that. It kind of can sound like that to the one who lives in separation and still believes in meaning and purpose and free will and time. But it's actually the kind of the opposite, we could say, of a plunge into existential despair. It is a release and a relief, if you like, from all of that. It's the ultimate freedom. I mean, the freedom that we seek, however we seek it, we can't help seeking freedom. We may not think we're seeking freedom. We may think we're seeking a girlfriend or a nice car, but really we're seeking freedom. But we can't imagine that the freedom that we're seeking is really the freedom from the burden of the self. I mean, if we get spiritually switched on, or we become a Buddhist, or we study Advaita or something like that, we might even start understanding intellectually that we are seeking something called freedom from the self. But we can never know what that means. We can never know what it means. The separated individual person can never know what that means. Richard, sitting here as a character, does not know what that means. And yet, when the sense of self collapses, somehow it is possible for these words to come out. These are the words of, I'm not the first person to use this phrase. This is oneness talking to oneness. This is oneness here and oneness there. Oneness in the guise of a character called Richard, oneness in the guise of characters out there called John or Jim or Pete or Mary or Elizabeth. This is oneness talking to oneness. And these words as they're meant are either heard or they're not heard. And whether they're heard or not heard has nothing to do with who you think you are. You can make no choice about whether these words are heard as they are intended to be heard or not. They are either heard or they are not heard. But that's not something that you as a character can do anything about. I went to meetings on non-duality for a long time, and I heard these words with my ears, but I didn't hear these words, if you see what I mean. Nevertheless, some magnetic attraction kept drawing me back to listen to the words that were utterly incomprehensible to me. And that may be what's happening here. Ramana Maharshi has a phrase for this, which is quoted over and over again. I've quoted it many times, so have many other people. You know, if your head is in the tiger's mouth, then you will be here, or you will be some apparent other place like this, where other words somehow like this are also being spoken. Your presence here has nothing whatsoever to do with who you think you are, has nothing whatsoever to do with any choice that you think you have made. My presence here has nothing to do with any choice that I think I have made. I am not here because Emerson issued an invitation, and then at 6:30, I looked at my watch and thought I'd better start sitting down now. That might seem to be the case, but it isn't. So the suggestion from here is that this, as with everything else, is simply happening. This is simply what is happening. There's no meaning to it. There doesn't need to be. There's no purpose to it. There doesn't need to be. There's no purpose to anything. When the Pope appears on the balcony of St. Peter's in Rome, there is no purpose to that. It is just happening. It has no more significance and no less significance than me talking to you now, or this sip of water I'm about to take. Nothing is any greater and nothing is any lesser than anything else. Everything is simply what it is. Everything is simply whatever is happening. No meaning, no purpose. It's not going anywhere. It doesn't need to go anywhere. Like other people, I've occasionally tried to sum this up, and like other people, I've failed. But one of the ways I have tried and failed to sum this up is by the simple phrase, this is it, this is enough. There doesn't need to be anything else. We don't need, when this is seen for what it is, it doesn't need meaning and purpose. You don't need meaning and purpose. A tree in the park does not need meaning and purpose to be a perfect tree, and I and you do not need meaning and purpose to be a perfect whatever description we want to use. Character, person if you like, individual if you like, divine puppet, to use somebody else's phrase if you like. So I've no idea whether a word of this made sense or not, but I also know it doesn't matter, except to the mind. Now, if none of that made sense, the mind may be screaming in agony, but it doesn't matter. Because the mind has no purchase here. Nothing that the mind says has any purchase here. And yet we're going to spend some of the next hour and 3/4, hour and a half, whatever it might be. I have no idea. Maybe it's an hour. It doesn't matter, because this, after all, is the timeless. We'll probably spend some of the next little while, exercising the mind, throwing ideas around, questions and answers and so forth. And that might be interesting. It might not be, but it might be interesting. But it doesn't matter. I think that's enough for an introductory talk.
That was beautiful. Thank you. That was brilliant. I think that's the end of the meeting. I think you've answered every question and there's nothing to ask. It's quite obvious. But I have a question here from YouTube, and I'll get to William. Yoshi asks, how do you deal with difficult situations as a non-dual person?
Oh, wow. I don't know where to start with that. Firstly, I don't want to deconstruct the question too much, but firstly, of course, there's no such thing as a non-dual person. I have no idea what a non-dual person would be. I mean, that is, that is a contradiction in terms. Seeing non-duality is seeing that there is no such thing as a person. So having got that out of the way, maybe if I could, I'll go back and try and deal with the questions I think it was probably intended. Can you just read the first part out again, Emerson?
Yes. How do you deal with difficult situations as a non-dual person?
Yeah, well, of course, I don't deal with difficult situations. You don't deal with difficult situations. Nevertheless, yeah, difficult situations can arise for whatever we want to call this. Let's call this the character. All I can say to that is that whatever happens, happens. It's too unpredictable to say anything more than that. I mean, I'd love to give some kind of like rules or guidelines from the kind of lofty perch of the seeing of non-duality and so on. I can't do that. I mean, I probably could if I was a guru, but then if I was a guru, I'd be wearing a robe. So we know I'm not. It's too. All I can say is that something will happen. Something will always happen. There's a difficulty and there'll be a response. If I kind of pay attention to what I think is maybe or probably underlying this, the spirit of the question, maybe it's something like, well, if this is seen, is the response to difficulties likely to be different? With caution, I would say, yes, it probably is. Because although there are no rules about this, you'll find, maybe other speakers might say the same as well, although there are no rules about this, there's likely to be maybe, I mean, for example, some reduction in neurosis, perhaps. So in which case we could say, well, when a difficulty arises, maybe the way it's dealt with might be less neurotic than it was before. Maybe, but we need to be cautious because, as somebody else has also said, this is living life with the blinkers off. This is really living life in the raw. So in some ways, if we're looking at this as a way out of difficulties, I would say, yeah, probably best to forget that. I mean, that's the sort of stuff of the teacher or the guru who is beckoning you onto a spiritual path. Come on, come on, come on, follow me, follow me, follow me. I'll give you mantras, I'll give you techniques. Your life will then become easier. This is not about your life becoming easier. It's about the seeing that there is no one who has a life. So dealing with difficulties will unfold in whatever way it unfolds. It might be easier, it might not be. This is living life in the raw. This is not a recipe for comfort. In a way, it's a wonder that anybody should seek this. But of course, nobody who seeks this can possibly know what it is that they're seeking. So anyone, when I was seeking this, anyone who's seeking this is seeking an illusion. It cannot possibly be known what this is as long as there's someone there seeking it. Of course, it's natural to think, well, I'm seeking something here and, if I find it, I'll get some goodies from it. Well, firstly, I will never find it and you will never find it. And secondly, if it is found, there'll be no goodies from it in that sense.
Beautifully said. One more question, so I'll get to William and Magdalena. This one is from David Wow. Why would I talk about non-duality with other people, mainly when I had a few drinks, if there's still a sense of separation here, glimpses aside?
Why would you? I've no idea. But if you've had a few drinks, maybe that's why. Try talking about it to people when you're sober for a change, maybe. I don't know. All I can say is, why does anybody talk about this? There's the problem with why questions is they always invite an answer which is a story, so we need to be very careful. So I'm not going to kind of construct an elaborate story here. I'm just going to say, well, for some of us, some of the time it's kind of fun. It's kind of fun. Now, I'll add to that. I don't know whether I'm being unfair here or not, but I'll add to that. If somebody gives you a more pompous answer to that question, why do you talk about non-duality? And I hope you know what I might mean by a more pompous argument. Well, I'm doing it for the salvation of mankind, or to make the world a better place, or to save the world from itself. I would run a mile from those people. I'll absolutely run a mile. Anyone who says much more than, well, firstly, I'm not talking about it, but talking is happening. And secondly, well, it can be kind of interesting and kind of fun. It's not going to get anybody anywhere. It's not going to do anybody any good, but it's kind of fun. If anybody, says much more than that, I'd be a bit cautious about that. I want to throw something else in here, actually, because this came up the other day. I mean, there was there's kind of I might have referred back to this before. Some of you might have been aware of an event in London some years ago called Dream Bus Live, which had many non-duality speakers at it, of which I was one. And it was very apparent. I was there for about half of it, you know, watching, listening to people, giving a talk myself. It became very apparent to me very quickly that the audience had more or less sort of split down the middle. And it's like, it seemed to me, this is my interpretation anyway, it seems to me like half the audience were there kind of to hear this, you know, kind of to hear this. The other half were there as the evangelical Christian equivalent of non-duality seekers. They were evangelical non-duality seekers who were desperate to get the word of non-duality out into the world in order to save it. And it was really, really clear kind of division between, you know, the audience at this event. Well, okay, if you want to be a non-duality missionary and get this out there as a way to save the world, well, you know, good luck to you. This is fresh in my mind. This happened several years ago. But this is fresh in my mind because I happened to be at a non-duality meeting last week, and that exactly the same split was in the audience then. So I think it must be something very, very common. Very common. It's like half the audience there wanted to use this to save the world. Well, if you want to do that, good luck. You know, let me know. You know, I don't know. Come back in 6 months' time and let us know how well you've done. You know, this can't be used. This can't be used. You know, as Tony says, you know, this is not a bit or something like this. You know, this is not a business deal. You know, the individual is a businessman, always looking for, you know, what profit can I get out of this? There's no profit to be had out of this. This is just happening purposelessly, without motivation, without goal. It's just happening. And I'm going to throw in one last thing. All the purposes, all the goals, all of those things that the mind so loves, they are stories that the mind has made up. There's nothing wrong with them. Absolutely nothing wrong with them, but they are just stories. They're just narratives that the mind tells itself.
William.
Hi, William.
Hi, Richard. How are you?
Yeah, I'm okay. Yeah, I'm enjoying my gin tonight. Thank you. Yeah.
Nice. What I wanted to ask about is, obviously I love this message, and I don't, like you said, there's no way of knowing what this is about when the person drops, but there's some sense of longing or resonance. But at the same time, when I'm listening to you talk, the fear in my body is extreme, and it's the fear of not knowing. And it seems like as an individual, there's just a constant need to predict what's coming next and what will happen if I say this, what will happen if I do that. It's not so much a question, but would you be able to say anything about that?
Well, the first thing I'm going to say is that you say it's the fear of not knowing. You don't know that. That's an interpretation. That's what the mind says. Oh, this is a fear of not knowing. And somehow in saying that, you've kind of labeled it, and maybe it feels a bit, you know, it may or may not be. I have no idea. I mean, fear is fear. Fear is, you know, physical. It's visceral. You know, beyond that, no, it's unknowable. It's unknowable. I'll say a bit more. I mean, this is a very threatening message to the ego. The mind, you know, the ego does not want to die. This could get quite complicated, because somebody might come on in a minute and point out that I've often said the ego doesn't exist. Well, it doesn't. You know, the ego doesn't exist, but nevertheless, there's a kind of energy there. Call it ego, call it mind, call it whatever you like. You know, and it, although it isn't real, it doesn't want to die. If that sounds paradoxical, I can't help it. It's just, you know, as close as we can get. So it may be that, you know, it may be that. So there's there's let's say there's a magnetic attraction there, so there's something in that energy that does want to die, that recognizes that this is a place where it might die. Yeah, there may be something in that energy that recognizes that its death is the only possible solution to the dilemma of being a person. But also there may be another energy, I mean, it's the same energy, of course, but manifesting in a different way, you know, which we could call the energy of the mind or the energy of the ego or whatever we like, which, you know, equally desperately doesn't want to die because it knows that, you know, this, then it's all over. You know, it's all over for the ego, and it doesn't like the sound of that at all. It might be that. There's no way of knowing. That could equally just be a story. That could equally be a load of cobblers. We can't, in other words, the bottom line is that it's unknowable. That it's unknowable. And there is something important about this, because ultimately, you know, when this is seen, even if it's only kind of partly glimpsed, the unknowability of it is part of the beauty of it. And it's part of the relief. Over and over and over again, you will hear people say that, you know, there is relief when this is seen. Or even if it's just glimpsed, and that relief might be about, you know, several different things, but I think partly it's that, just even the mind, and I mean, most minds are really kind of stupid around this. That isn't an insult, you know, to anybody. My mind is really stupid around this, but, you know, even the mind can kind of get that if it's really recognized that this is unknowable, there are no answers to the big questions that the mind likes to ask. Once it really gets that this is unknowable, then that can be quite relaxing. That can be quite relaxing. The mind can go, oh, now I don't have to worry whether I'm going to go to hell if I worship the Catholic God or the Protestant God. I don't have to worry about that because it's unknowable. It's just a story.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to ask was, a few different speakers have said to me, speakers of this message, it's not what I think it is. So, and you've said, I've heard on YouTube videos as well, that this can be quite a shock. I guess I'm constantly projecting images or pictures or visualizations of what it would be if there wasn't someone there, but it's completely, there's no way of even though there's been glimpses, there's no way of me getting a reference on what was actually seen in the glimpse.
No, it can't be what, you know, the me, the I, the ego, whatever you call it. I mean, you know, it lives in this world of ideas and experiences, and this, what we're talking about here, is neither an idea nor an experience. So there is no way that the I, the ego, the self with a little s, whatever, can get any kind of handle on what this is. This is why over and over again you'll come across different individuals who describe the seeing of this as a shock. It has to be a shock. Everything, it's kind of, you know, obvious, tautological really, you know, everything that the eye's ever experienced, it has experienced as an eye. This is the disappearance of the eye. So it's not an experience that the eye has. It is the disappearance of the eye. So there's nothing there, and, you know, to have an experience. And yet this goes on, phenomena goes on. How weird is that? So this is unimaginable. This is unimaginable. And I mean, for anyone out there who, I'm sure there are, you know, plenty of people out there who, like me, you know, maybe followed spiritual paths and had spiritual experiences or transpersonal experiences or non-ordinary experiences, whatever, you know, whatever we want to call them. Really, all the mind can do is relate what we're talking about to those. You know, this must be some sort of spiritual or transpersonal or non-ordinary experience. No, it isn't. It's none of those. It's kind of the most ordinary thing in the world. It's just the disappearance of the one who experiences. everything that this thought, I mean, I was a spiritual seeker for years, everything that this thought about non-duality, about this, every interpretation it put on it, it had to come from a position that somehow, if this was ever seen and when this was ever seen, there would, there'd be someone in here seeing it, and there'd be a kind of transmutation or a change out there. I mean, whatever. I wasn't naive enough to think that necessarily everything would be glowing with golden light. Maybe it would, or maybe it wouldn't. But even without thinking about it consciously, that had to be the interpretation that there's something in here and it's going to experience life completely differently when this is seen. No, nothing like that. No, life just goes on being life. It's experienced as completely and utterly ordinary when this is seen. What happens is the disappearance of the one who sees it. That cannot be imagined. It can't be tasted. It's just impossible. It's one of the reasons this communication is hopeless, and yet, we somehow still have fun doing it, some of us. It's mad. This is mad. Absolute madness.
Absolute madness. Thank you, Richard.
And it's an affront to everything that the mind likes. It's an absolute affront.
Yeah.
You want to, if you moved like I have in sort of, fairly spiritual circles, among, friends and people, who are sort of quite into sort of spiritual things and so forth, you want to upset them, start talking about this. That'll do it.
I haven't had any real spiritual experience before. I mean, I've read a few books about it, but I never tried any spiritual stuff before I came into this. So, yeah.
No, I just threw that in because, I mean, maybe it's changing now, but, but often there is often people who kind of eventually find themselves washed up in the graveyard of spiritual seeking known as non-duality. Often, like me, they've had a kind of fair few goes round the spiritual funfair. I mean, a lot of people haven't, but often they have. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much.
Magdalena, please go ahead.
Yes. Hello, I don't have any questions because they have died already. My questions have that. I have been attending Tony Parsons' talks for several years. And then I came across of your book about tea and cake, eating the cake, drinking tea, something like that. And we have some exchange per email some years ago already, but somehow I didn't. Well, I'm living in Switzerland, so also it's a little bit more difficult to come. And now I've got the link from Emerson. Thank you very much. It's just kind to send it. So I decided to just pop up, and I'm enjoying. It's really nice. I feel yes, and thank you very much. And maybe I pop up more times, but it's a little bit a stupid time for me because it's already 8, and usually we will have our supper and things like this. So we'll see. But thanks, and I enjoyed it.
Good, thank you. Thank you.
I love the Pope. Wow. I'm originally from Poland, exile in Switzerland from Catholicism.
Oh, right, yeah.
Well, no, not really, but it's just fun. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for sharing that.
Thank you, Magdalena. I have a few questions here from Facebook and YouTube. There's so many here. Okay. This is from Yoshi. My issue is not separation, but issues life throws up that cause anxiety and stress.
Mm.
Did you want to comment on that?
Oh God. Yeah, That's the nature of life. Yeah, anxiety and stress. It may be the nature of life. It probably will be for some of the time. Yeah, I mean, what can I say? You know, there are there are things that the apparent individual can do which, you know, might help to alleviate anxiety and stress, and we all know what they are. In a way, there's no point rehearsing them here, but, you know, get outside in the green spaces, psychotherapy, you know, I mean, gin, if it floats your boat. I don't, you know, see what I'm trying to get at? Yeah, this is the kind of the weft and woof, I think the phrase is, of everyday life, and you know, and it can be painful. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and in a sense, one of the challenges for both the speaker about non-duality and the listener about non-duality is, in a sense, you know, there is nothing from this to be said about that. It's frustrating, you know. The person asking the questions wants, not necessarily in this particular case, but in general, you know, wants solutions and answers and help, and that's all completely natural. And the person sitting in the chair is quite likely to want to give solutions and help and answers, and that is also, you know, completely natural. And one of the frustrations of this communication is that's not what this is about. You know, this communication is not helpful. It's not on that level. It's not. There are many, many people out there, you know, giving, I'm not sure what to call it. Well, offering help on all sorts of levels. This communication doesn't do it. You know, this communication says it might be seen that there's no one who has anxiety. It might be seen that there is no one who suffers. What help is that to the one who feels themselves to be suffering? Probably none whatsoever. And yet something happens that, I'm going to use the word drags because it just popped into my head. Maybe it's the tiger's mouth metaphor again, that drags some individuals to this communication. And the only other thing I can add to that is that if I think back in the story of time, you know, Richard as a character, if I think back into that story some years ago, I don't know, 20 years ago or more, that would very much have been, you know, my story. That there was a character suffering from, you know, all sorts of things. You know, anxiety, stress, all sorts of tremendous difficulties, who found himself dragged somehow to this communication over and over and over and over again, even though it was useless, even though it offered no help. Don't forget, I am the man that came up with the ultimate mantra: helpless, hopeless. I can't remember what the third phrase was myself. The third word was myself. Meaningless. I am the originator of the great mantra: helpless, hopeless, meaningless. I am helpless. It is hopeless, and this is meaningless. I mean, now there's a mantra to get us slitting our throats, isn't there? And yet somehow, if it's heard in the right way, whatever that means, that's not what it does. If it's heard in the right way, it's wonderful. I can't explain that, but I do know other individuals who also hear it and have heard it in that way. So yeah, I too came to non-duality meetings feeling stressed and anxious and hopeless and in pain and suffering and all sorts of angst and so forth. And you know, these bloody meetings, they were no bloody help at all on that level, and yet something here kept bringing me back. So that may be what's happening for you. Smell the sweet breath of the tiger on your neck. because you're dragged to yet another non-duality meeting, hoping for help from it, which isn't going to come. And yes, in spite of that, the next one you may be dragged there as well. And at some point, it may just be seen that for all the suffering, there is no one in the center of that suffering. This isn't about an end to suffering. This is about seeing that there is no one who suffers. That's not a comforting thing to say. It's not meant to be. It's just a description. This isn't meant to be comforting or discomforting. It's really just a description. It's nothing more than that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Richard. That mantra actually comes up quite a lot in meetings. People repeat it. Jason, go ahead, please. Maybe Jason did that.
No, I didn't do that. Hi, Richard. Hi, Emerson. In the intro, you mentioned something about free will and arguing in a bar about free will. And I know in these meetings, a lot of time people will join in and they want to argue about free will and whatever. I don't want to argue about free will at all. I want to get rid of free will. It's like, it just seems to create so much anxiety and regrets and, oh, am I going to do the wrong thing? Am I going to choose the wrong thing? Or the regrets of, oh, I chose the wrong thing. I did the wrong thing, la, la, la. So it's like, if I really had free will, I would just give up free will, but I don't have the choice to give up free will. But, you know, there's this belief in it still, but it just seems like such a burden. I don't know. Anyway, I felt like I just wanted to get that off my chest somehow. So I don't know if you have more to add to that or not, but thank you for listening.
It's interesting you call it a burden. I agree. But of course, to many individuals living, let's say, in separation, it's regarded as the greatest gift, the holiest gift of all. And to challenge free will, it can be a tremendous insult, a very, very quick way to start an argument, if not a fight. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I totally grok with what you're saying. Actually, it's a tremendous burden. Yeah. And what you're expressing is, I've quoted before, I think he's an English philosopher, Galen Strawson. He says, I know there's no such thing as free will, but when I walk down the street, I can't feel that. I'm unable to feel that. And of course, that absolutely, you know, if there's the feeling there, it goes with that solid feeling that I am a person. It's absolutely. And, you know, the mind can tell itself as much as it likes, you know, oh, there's no possibility of free will. I mean, we don't have to go to non-duality for this. You can deconstruct free will through logic very, very easily, or you can deconstruct it through neuroscience. It doesn't make any difference to the feeling as I walk down the street. You know, if that's there, it's there. Yeah. Yeah, it may be one of the reasons why perhaps life, you know, there's no promise in what's being said here, but nonetheless, just as a description, it may be that when this is seen, life is worn a little more lightly. And that might be one of the reasons, because free will does not, you know, is not such a heavy cloak and such a heavy burden when it's been seen through. Yeah. Of course, it's not that there isn't any free will. I mean, you know, you can disprove free will through philosophy and logic if you want to. But what's being said here is not really that there's no free will. What's being said here is there is no person. And so free will, in a sense, becomes irrelevant. You know, it's not what's being said here. I mean, I'm quite happy to say there's no free will, but that's not really what's being said here. What's being said here is there is no person who can exercise free will. Yeah. And by the way, I don't know how weird that sounds, but there's an awful lot of neuroscientists out there that agree with that statement now. So however weird it sounds a great deal less weird than it did 100 years ago in the story of time. Yeah.
Well, if I could get rid of the burden of the person, I would choose that as well. It doesn't seem to be a choice.
There's no choice. I wish there was. No, there's no choice about that. There's no choice about anything. It sucks in some ways.
Okay, thank you.
Are you in your car, by the way? Are you
Pardon
in your
me?
car, Jason?
Yes, I am. Yes.
Yeah, I hope you're not actually driving, are you? While you're
No, no, no. I'm parked. I'm parked. Don't worry.
good, good, good. Health and
Thanks.
safety and all that. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no one driving. William, please go ahead.
Richard, so Tony, I've heard him talk quite a bit about a contraction of energy that's in every cell of the body. And I've heard other speakers say that the sense of self comes out of that contraction. And I was speaking to someone just before this who speaks about this communication, and he was saying the sense of me isn't the contraction. He said there's the contraction of energy out of which which is like a position, and out of that sense of position comes the sense that I am here, or I am that contraction. Well, maybe you wouldn't say it like that, but what I wanted to ask about is it only really when that contraction leaves the body that the sense of I am goes with it? Or would you not distinguish it like that?
I'm
Like
going to be a bit cautious here. I might regret giving this answer. This has come to. I would just answer a very simple yes to that. Yeah, yeah. I didn't really kind of follow what you're quoting what somebody else said, which is a bit.
Yeah.
I didn't really follow it, so I wouldn't like to comment on it. I mean, we're all groping around anyway. We're all trying to F the ineffable, as I've often said. I think I borrowed that one from Alan Watts. So we all try and say this in different ways, and none of it's correct. But in essence, I would say what you just said at the end there. Yeah, that it's like there's a sense of contraction, and when this is seen, there's a kind of, I want to say there's an explosion out of that, but that sounds perhaps a little bit overly dramatic. Yeah, it's often what I come back to is kind of my own, and equally pathetic as anybody else's, because we're using words attempt to describe this. Like it's a loss of contraction. Yeah, yeah.
I suppose the contraction
of what that is, and if I can describe it in any other way. The only other ways I can describe it is using metaphors, which I won't do tonight because I've done that plenty before. It doesn't, all I can say is, when it happens, it's known.
The reason I kind of asked that is because when there's a glimpse, obviously there's no one there registering that something's happened. Like I remember looking back to some glimpses, there was not a certain point of recognition something's changed. I mean, there was an obviousness that this was what was always being looked for, but there wasn't a sense of something's really changed differently. But then coming back, say the next day or whatever after that glimpse, there was kind of like, it felt like there was something totally different. And then after listening to this message, I could make sense out of that sense of me wasn't there. But the me always seemed to come back.
Or interrupt there and say that it sounds like that something energetic happened. In what you're describing, and that's that we are talking about, again, many people have said this many times, we're talking about an energetic shift. We're not talking about anything that has to do with ideas in the mind. Ideas in the mind might change, or the story in the mind might change, might not change, might go wild, might not, but that's kind of irrelevant. We're talking about an energetic shift which has nothing to do with the mind.
Right, yeah.
Although it is likely to affect the mind.
Well, the thing about the mind is I'm still trying to work out why does the me keep coming back, because I'm trying to work out what's the difference between that and then when the contraction's completely gone. And it doesn't matter if, well, not that I could find this answer that would satisfy me, because then but even if there was a satisfactory answer, it wouldn't make a difference knowing what the difference is when the sense of me seems to return versus, I have to use the word liberation because I can't think of any other word, when there's no longer the sense of self returning.
Well, if an answer did come which would satisfy the mind, that would probably satisfy the mind for about 36 hours at the most. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
this is what keeps the mind going. I mean, it makes it so apparently powerful. It's not really powerful, but you know, I mean, you think, you know, some minds, I mean, some minds are able to spend sort of 75 to 80 years, you know, wondering whether the transubstantiation of the host is a metaphor or literal. You know, does the wine and the bread literally turn into the blood and flesh of Christ, or is it a metaphor? I mean, that can keep some minds going for 80 years. That's how powerful the mind is. Once it gets a bone to gnaw on, you know, it's just what the mind does. You know,
Yeah.
it'll go on doing its thing. Well, meanwhile, you know, this explosion out of localization or contraction can happen at any time to anyone, whether they
What you
come to non-duality meetings or not.
that was the biggest thing I kind of realized when I started listening to you, because you were one of the last speakers I came across. And I started watching. Well, I heard a lot of good things about you from some of the other speakers, so I thought I've got to check out Richard.
All right.
I
Okay.
started watching all your YouTube videos, and one of the things that I noticed you mention more than the other speakers is this fact that it's completely acausal. When you shared examples in some of those videos about someone who hasn't come across this and suddenly they're not there, and
All right. Yeah.
and then I really realized it's got nothing to do with listening to this or not listening, or whatever it is, or having an awareness that you want liberation or not.
Yeah. Again, this is another insult to the mind. Maybe this is the evening for not insulting the mind, but for noticing that a lot of this is an insult to the mind. That's another one that, you know, the mind obviously lives in a world of cause and effect, which also, of course, means justice and justice, cause and effect. This is seen because it is deserved. Because, you know, my karma has been purified or because God shines his light especially on me because I'm especially holy. It's a real insult to the mind, you know, that this can acausal. What are you talking about? I mean, it just overthrows everything. I have written in you know, and I've said in other places, you know, this overthrows all authority. Forget it. You know, forget authority. Holy books and, you know, the stories of the priesthoods where what comes to us is deserved by our own, you know, we reap the fruits of our own doing, whether through God's benevolence or through karma, one or the other. This is a real insult, you know, to suggest that, you know. I mean, obviously, in my case, I deserved it, but not anybody else. You know, it's an insult.
Yeah. Well, the
It
thing
really
is,
people get. I mean, people who are invested, you know, in the kind of stories of spiritual paths or religions can get very, very angry about this communication.
yeah. Well, even in regards to what
It
Jason,
happened to me. I've been insulted in live meetings by Buddhists. Not often.
I was going to say, even in regards to what Jason was saying about free will, even if there was cause and effect, which clearly there isn't, that would still assume then there's a person who can choose to do the right thing.
Yeah.
So either way you look at it, there's nothing that could be done about it. So.
Well, as I often say, it's worse than that. There's no one who can do anything about it. That takes it a stage further back. It's not that there's nothing that can be done about it. There's no one who can. There is no one. Simple as that. But in a way, also, none of that matters because what happens, happens. So if there's a character there who is drawn to doing something, whatever that might be, you know, whatever it might be. You know, we all know the kind of things. I mean, if there's a character there who is drawn to doing something, then that's quite likely to happen. That's fine. That's okay as well. I mean, this gives the ultimate permission, if you like. There's no one who needs permission. There's no one who can give it. But nevertheless, in a way, this is the ultimate in permissiveness, if you like.
Yeah.
It's all okay. You know, meditate, don't meditate. Chant mantras, don't chant mantras. Go to therapy, don't go to therapy. There's no one, you know, that's all simply what's happening. Could say it's all oneness doing its thing, if you like.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't get this right, but then on the other hand, you can't get it wrong. So it's, you know, at some point, and I feel the point has come now, at some point in any talk I give, I find myself saying, so you might as well relax. If you could, you know, I'm not suggesting there's anyone who could do that. And nevertheless, relaxation might happen. And if relaxation happens, again, to quote myself, I'm quoting myself too much tonight, but to quote myself, if relaxation happens, then that may be a great blessing. It may be the greatest blessing. It may be the greatest blessing there is for relaxation to happen.
Okay, thanks very much, Richard.
Thank you so much, William. Non-dualities caller. Just a moment here. Eric, please go ahead.
Hi, Richard. How are you doing today?
Hello, Eric. Hi.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to thank you. Talking about how
You're cutting out, Eric. You're frozen.
Irrelevant to the mind, and not to say that. Oh, I'm frozen. Can you still hear me?
Now it's good.
Now, missed the first part. Yeah, go on.
Okay. I appreciate you talking about how this doesn't touch mind, or mind can't touch this, and all expressions are this. It allows one to basically, not that there is anyone that can do this, but I've noticed that there is a slowing down. Am I frozen again?
We keep losing you. Yeah, we got
Okay.
You notice that there's something about slowing down there, then we lost you.
Well, I will leave it at that. And I just wanted to say thank you, and I appreciate your talks.
Thank you. It's good to hear that. Thank you, Eric.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Eric.
No, I can't notice, you know, oh, the spiritual background. I just can't resist that. Namaste. Too many years spent following the guru.
There's a couple of questions here, Richard, from the interweb, from YouTube. This one from David Elaine. Hi, Richard and Emerson. Love and greetings from us both. Good luck, Richard, to you and Don with the start of the live meetings. Hope to get to see you both sometime soon. Hey, Richard, this is from Robin Starbuck. When encountering mental and physical anguish, can we simply focus on our empty fullness and inseparableness to regain our freedom?
No. How would anyone do that? No, I wish. Oh, I wish. You know. I hope that didn't sound harsh when I said no like that. It would be so wonderful if we could. How can anyone focus on empty fullness? Empty fullness is what's seen when there's no one there. As long as there's someone there trying to focus on it, it can't be seen. I'm sorry. I wish I could give another answer. Empty fullness is only seen when I'm not there seeing it. Yeah, I have to leave that one at that.
Yoshi asked, what about consequences of actions?
Yeah. What about them? This is hell, this is, to the individual. Obviously, yeah, actions have consequences. Of course they do. Of course they do. Well, in terms of, like, let's say, nature, natural existence, cause and effect, within the dream of time, then of course actions have consequences. If I throw this glass of gin over my head, I'll have a wet hair. Consequences, of course, cause and effect. We live, we live in a story of stuff unfolding. Not a very elegant word I managed to find. I don't know why it took me so long to find the word stuff. We live in, a world of, stuff unfolding in time, in which, of course, cause and effect and consequences are part of the appearance. We then turn that into usually a very complex, very important story in our mind, which only exists as an abstraction, as an abstract story, that, therefore, because of cause and effect, and then out of that come all the sort of religious stories and the spiritual stories, all to do with cause and effect and karma and pleasing God and stuff like that. So it all becomes, and doing good and doing ill and all of that. But that is, I'm sorry, that's all just stories that the mind spins to keep itself entertained, to keep itself occupied, and to keep itself in control. After all, if I'm talking as the mind now, if I spin a story that I have a purpose on this earth, this planet, and that purpose is to please God, then I have an entertainment for life. I have something to keep me going for life, or until the dark night of the soul hits me, of course. So as far as what we're communicating here, I'm sorry, that all just goes, whoa. It's another insult to the mind. What are you telling me? That, consequences of my action aren't important? What about karma? Come on, Richard, you used to go to Buddhist meetings. You know about karma. Yeah, it all just goes blown away like sand in the wind. It's awful for the mind. It's terrible. All there is this. How often have we heard that? That's not a Richard original statement, as you probably know. It's just this. It's just what's happening. No past, no future, no time, no cause, no effect. It's awful for the mind. It's terrible for the mind. But in another way, it's kind of also rather wonderful. It is in a way the root out of the mind's torture as well. It's kind of very paradoxical. I mean, hearing this message, it's not a message. Hearing this communication, it's kind of torture for the mind. It's also might be the mind's root out of its self-imposed torment. All of this is metaphor because, of course, the mind doesn't even actually exist. We're talking just about an ever-changing thought stream.
This question from Yoshi. What are the best non-dual techniques for freedom from the self?
Oh, well, firstly, I don't give those out publicly because they're very secret. They're very powerful if they fall into the wrong hands, and you have to pay a lot of money for them. Not in any way because I'm money orientated, but to prove your sincerity. So that's really all I can say on that one. When you've sent me a large enough check, I will reveal to you the secret about which you ask. Yeah. Will that do? I can't go any further into that one. obviously.
I think
know.
that technique is 50% on sale right now on nonduality.live.
But there you go. Apply to Emerson for a discount.
For a discount. Does this have any
Do what
impact?
you like. No, I mean, no, do what you like. It won't be you doing it, but if you're drawn to something, do it. You know, I mean, techniques can be wonderful if you find them wonderful. They can be torture if you find them torture. If you're drawn to something, well, I'm saying if you're drawn to something, do it. I should really be saying if you're drawn to something, you may well find yourself doing it. Well, there's a clumsy way to speak. I mean, I can't get much more dualistic than saying you may find yourself doing it. But, hopefully you kind of get the spirit of what I'm saying. Yeah. If you're drawn to something, do it.
There's a question here from Chiragacharya. Does this have an impact on the body? Like the heartbeats get slow as there is immense relaxation?
That last, I'm going to ignore the last bit, the specific about heartbeats, and I have absolutely no idea. But I mean, I can't give a definitive answer to the first part of that question. But my guess is yes. It's just a guess, because we're talking about, as I've said before, we're talking about going from contraction into, I just use the word openness, if you like. I think I can't be sure, but I think if you talk to quite a lot of characters who talk about this or where this has been seen or whatever, there'll probably be a sense that, yeah, there's more. I mean, I talk a lot about relaxation. And don't try and pin me down too much about what I mean by that, because I might burst into tears if you do. But certainly within that, there's something physical. Yeah, relaxation of a physical nature is quite likely to be part of the so I'll be trying to be really careful about what words I choose here. Part of the experience, which is experienced by no one when contraction opens out, when localization is seen through, when the self is seen through, if you like, or drops away. Yeah. It's likely to be less, contraction. I don't mean something as simple as physical tension by contraction, and yet that is somehow contained within it. Yeah. I think we better stop that one there before I'm declared a heretic by the non-duality archbishops.
This question by John: do you think non-duality is the biggest scam in the human history?
I mean, obviously, I'm tempted to say just yes, just for the shock value of it. But no, I think religion is the biggest scam in human history. I haven't dipped into it, but I haven't had to. But I have my hat of questions here. The one.
Yeah. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Hat of questions, and I know. I mean, I don't fix this. There are simply some random questions in there. I pick one out at random if I need to. But I know there is one in there about religion because I was sort of looking around in the hat earlier. No. This is kind of like the opposite of religion. And if you want me to explain what I mean by this, I probably could, but we might be here till 10 o'clock tonight, British time. But no, I think religion's the biggest scam in history, and this has nothing to do with religion. If you want me to expand on that, you'll have to ask me another. You probably don't, but if you do, you'll have to ask me another question about that.
There's another question here from John. So the problem is physical body and contraction in the nervous system. So is the problem the physical body and the contraction in the nervous system?
No, if that was the problem. I mean, I'm a little bit reluctant to accept the definition of this as a problem, because you could say that, you know, until this is seen, then contraction seems to be the natural state of being. It's not a problem. It seems to be the natural state of being. When this is seen, then it's realized that, if you like, this is actually the natural state of being. But no, the problem, I mean, if the problem was in the physical body, we could, you know, we could probably, you know, go to a yoga class, release the tension, and that would be all that would be necessary, maybe. So there was some other part of it in there as well, I've forgotten. The physical and something else, was it?
And contraction in the nervous system.
Well, that's a bit too abstract, the contraction in the nervous system. But again, I'd be tempted to say no. No, this is something, it's something evanescent and ineffable. That's quite annoying, because if it was a contraction in the nervous system or the physical body, there's probably something we could do about it. I mean, you know, I mean, when I'm physically tense, there's something I can do about that, apparently. No, it's not, you know, we can't pin this down in that way. It's the ultimate mystery, this is. Actually, you know, if you think you can describe this, then you probably know you're wrong. Just as when I try to describe this, I know that I'm wrong. I know I'm missing it. I'm just trying to get as close as I can, but as close as I can is still a million miles away.
There's a couple more questions here. We're running out of time, so there's tons of questions on YouTube.
We were going on till 1 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Oh, that's right. That's right. It never ends. Yeah, that's a secret, though. That's just for, you know, for people that have paid the secret entrance fee. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Chirag asked, "Do you mean that the me never goes? What goes is the desire that me should go?"
No, that's not what I mean. I can't put this terribly clearly, because again, it's a metaphor. You know, I mean, the me is actually a metaphor. I mean, the me doesn't actually exist. What's it a metaphor for? Well, the closest I can get to it is that sense of contraction and separation, which goes along with all the stuff I was talking about in perhaps my overlong introduction. You know, a sense that, you know, I'm a person and I have, you know, meaning in my life and free will, and I live in time and all of that. No, you know, that the me is just kind of part of that. I've forgotten the question now.
I'll repeat. Do you mean that the me never goes? What goes is the desire that the me should go.
No, you can't. If the desire for the me to go arises, you can't get rid of that. You can't get rid of that. It might disappear with the me, the sense that there's a me. Yeah.
Jade added, the sensation of the person, uncomfortable or narrow, is like any other sensation. Anger arises or appears and naturally goes.
I would say not. No, I wouldn't agree with that. I would say that it is the kind of core. I mean, the word sensation isn't a good one, but it'll have to do. I would say it is the core sensation that all the others seem to belong to. That's the difference. The sensation of anger seems to belong to me. The sensation of hunger seems to belong to me. The sensation of love seems to belong to me. The sensation of jealousy seems to belong to me. That's the difference. The me is like that central, you know, it's that central core. That's why it's not easy to describe the sensation of anger, but it is kind of possible. I don't think it's even possible to describe the sensation of me. I mean, I try it with words like contraction and so, but that doesn't make sense until it's lost. I mean, to say that the me is a sense of contraction makes no sense to anyone until that contraction disappears. Then it does make sense, only through the recognition of its loss.
This one is from John. Are we programmed meat robots?
That's come up before.
I've seen this question
Recognize that
before.
from last time.
Yes.
I think that people should be penalised if they can't be bothered. No, it's a lovely description. I do recognise it maybe from the last meeting. I'm not sure. It's a lovely description. Are we programmed meat robots? No, because we're not programmed, we're not meat, and we're not robots. Apart from that, it's a good description. Entirely accurate, except every word of it is wrong. I mean, if you like it as a metaphor, I mean, everything we say about what we are is a metaphor. So if you like that as a metaphor and it works for you, then have it. You know, I like the metaphor, the divine puppet. It's a little bit more romantic than a meat robot, but of course it's highly misleading. You know, the divine puppet wears divinity.
That sounds like a good rock band name. The
Yeah.
Divine Puppets. Yeah.
Yeah.
This
I
one
mean,
is
it's very misleading because a puppet implies a puppeteer. So, you know, if you want your meat robot, have it. That's fine.
Shira goes, "Hi, Richard. What makes one thought different from another is the content of the thought. After liberation, the content of the thought no longer remains important." Want me to read it again?
Yeah.
Hi, Richard. You
yeah.
got it?
Do the first part first, then stop.
Sure. Hi, Richard. What makes one thought different from another is the content of the thought. After liberation, the content of the thought no longer remains important.
Well, it may or it may not be important. I mean, it probably won't have as much importance. And I suggest that there are a lot of thoughts that will become very unimportant, probably, you know, and those are the thoughts that give the story meaning. It's probable that the thoughts that give the story meaning, like, for example, you know, I have a purpose in this life, and my purpose is to bring heathens to God. I mean, there's a thought, quite a big thought. It's pretty obvious that if this is genuinely seen through, then, you know, the content of that thought will probably disappear. You know, but then other thoughts like, you know, I'd like a cup of tea now. There's no reason they should change. I mean, thoughts, after all, are simply oneness thinking. One of the kind of things that tends to happen, I mean, on some spiritual paths, all thoughts can be seen as kind of a, you know, a bad thing, you know, naughty person, slap your hand for having a thought. And then on religious paths, certain kinds of thoughts might be seen to be bad, like, you know, oh, you know, I really fancy her as she walks down the street. So, you know, because, you know, spiritual paths tend to be redolent with meaning, and religious paths tend to be redolent with meaning. When this is seen, and it's seen that everything is equally and gloriously meaningless, then in a way, you know, the content of the thought can't really be good or bad or important or unimportant. It's just whatever's happening, whatever is arising. It's just oneness thinking. I fancy her. I'd better save that heathen for God. I want a cup of tea. It's all the same, really. It's just oneness, having thoughts.
This one is from Zoom user from Zoom. Most speakers of non-duality say nobody would want this. If it was possible, would you return the illusion of feeling separate?
No, I'm not aware. I mean, I'll just have to take that as read. I'm not aware that most speakers on non-duality say nobody would want this, except in the sense that, you know, you can't want it. If you are somebody, if you're a person, right, you can't want this because you can't know what it is. But to me, that's all that would mean. To say that nobody would want it would just mean that. I mean, to take it in the more kind of obvious and literal sense of, you know, I don't know, the speaker saying, "Oh, this is terrible. You know, please get me back to where I was before." No, that doesn't make sense to me. I mean, so all I can say is that whoever says that, you need to kind of go back to them and ask them what they mean by that. I mean, as an act of good faith, I will deal with that, the last part of that question. I haven't kind of queried the premise, yeah, just to take, without being kind of too smart, smart about it and trying to make some non-duality point or whatever, just taking it absolutely innocently, that question. No, I wouldn't want, I wouldn't want to go back. I, who do not exist, would not want to go back in time, which does not exist, to my previous experience, which I didn't have and which also doesn't exist. So I hope I've covered my non-duality bases there, but also given a kind of, straightforward answer. No, because this is, I'm not making any comment at all about, the quality of life, as it is lived now. I'm making no claims, no comments on that whatsoever. It's just the relief of the end of seeking.
It's kind of like someone calling Tony and asking Tony, "Can you turn me back into a me?"
Yes. Yeah. People do come to this message, this communication, and go away from it again because they recognize that it's a threat to their stories. And I mean, I've quoted this before. A friend of mine took somebody to a meeting, and afterwards they said, "But I like my stories." And lots of us do, of course, but then a lot of us, we're just, we have separation sickness, which means we are sick of separation. We can't really know what that is, but we know we've got it without being able to know what it really is. And we want an end to it. That's maybe one of the reasons we're prepared to sit through meetings like this, no matter how frustrating and aggravating and anger making they might be.
I think this is the last question, John. There's a lot more questions, but we only have time maybe for one more question. If the brain is useless and life is an automatic show, then why is there something in our heads as a brain?
I don't think I've ever said the brain is useless. No, so, I have no idea what that would mean. If somebody out there has said the brain is useless, you need to ask them that question. That's the first part of the question. What was the next part?
Then why is there something in our heads called a brain? If life is an automatic show, then why is there something in our heads as a brain?
Well, I'm not going to get into the kind of metaphysical shenanigans that often goes on around this about, but is there a brain? We don't know there's a brain. I can't see a brain right now. I'm not going to, go down that road. All I'm going to say is I think two things come to me. One is it's another why question. And I mean, why question? I'm not criticizing this at all. It's just, I'm just pointing out that why questions always invite a story. They can only ever be answered with a story. So if I did give an answer to that, it would only be a story, and anybody out there could sort of then challenge it with another story. And then the only other thing that comes to me is I feel like saying, well, try living life without a brain and see where it gets you. Have your brain removed, see what happens, if you like,
For a fee, we can do that for you. Richard, would you offer a brain removal?
Thank you. I've said before, this is many years ago. I was at a non-duality meeting run by somebody else. I'm not going to say who it was. And there was a discussion started firstly about whether the books on the bookshelves had words in them, because we couldn't see the words until we opened. Did the words magically appear? And then it went on for about another half hour about whether there was a sort of a back to somebody's head because you could only see their face, and then whether there was a brain inside the skull. I mean, if you like that sort of thing, fair enough, it passed the time. but yeah, I'm not really very interested in questions like that. Like I say, try removing the brain, have a trepanning, remove the brain and see what happens.
Well, thank you so much, Richard.
My glass of
Um,
gin is almost empty, so we have to stop.
Yes, we have to stop now. There is a brain removal and other techniques of enlightenment coming up on Saturday with Don and Richard. I'm just joking, but it's a live meeting coming up on Saturday.
Yeah, we really need to stress this is live.
This
real
is live.
in a room
I
together
know.
in London.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone, and mute yourself. And you can say bye, Richard.
Bye.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you
Bye,
so much.
Richard. Thank
Bye,
you.
Richard. Thank you very much.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.